Okay, on Friday we'll go one last time, but kind of line by line through this Russell article. We'll look at it in detail and try to think about how it connects to all of the stuff we've done in class. I also hope that today and Friday actually might work a bit like a big office hour. So in the sense that if you've got questions about anything in the class that you really want to raise, then don't feel that it has to be all that tightly tied to what I'm saying. If you see what I mean, just feel free to raise. If there's some question about Wittgenstein or Putnam or something that's really bugged you, then do raise that freely today or Friday. Yep. Okay, and think in between now and Friday if there's anything you will want to raise in the class then. Okay, today I want to pursue a little bit this thing about imagination, imaginative understanding versus objective explanation, and how it applies to Russell's ideas about acquaintance. So I was saying last time that there's this traditional distinction that really comes up in many, many areas between imaginative understanding and objective explanation. And there is a general problem about how the level of imaginative understanding is related to the level of objective explanation. And that so many of the issues we've been looking at can be understood as cases of that more general problem. So let's look at how imagination comes in to Russell's talk about acquaintance. I want to suggest, someone actually raised this just after class last time, there's a real puzzle about how imagining can have to do with Russell's notion of acquaintance, because imagining someone else's conscious life, imagining their mental life, has to do with what's going on inside their head, right? That's very intuitive. But acquaintance has to do with the relation between the person and something outside their head. So how can imagination give you that connection of acquaintance? You see what I mean? So I'll start by spelling that out, and I'll suggest that there's a notion of imagining de re that actually addresses this. Then I'll go on to look at how this applies to Wittgenstein's thing and following a rule, and then make some. I was pretty rough on Davidson on the idea that reference drops out from an account of how language connects to reality. But Davidson's point actually has a lot more to be said for it than I really allowed, and I'll come on to that at the end. Okay, so the idea here is to begin drawing everything together and also to give you the chance to raise questions about anything that you like along the way. Okay, so here's that thing from Russell we had last time, this really striking remark that this is the main characteristic of a mind, the faculty of being acquainted with things other than itself. You know you've got a mind there when it can be connected to things outside itself by this relation of acquaintance. Acquaintance with objects essentially consists in the relation between the mind and something other than the mind. It is this that constitutes the mind's power of knowing things. So we looked at Pilischen's picture of acquaintance. So as you've probably seen by now, Pilischen is really putting himself in the Russell tradition and saying that his idea of causally connecting to the objects that you're tracking is a relation of acquaintance. And you could keep that picture and say, well, consciousness comes in, but for Pilischen, it's not coming in as a working part of the system. Yeah, consciousness is something given off in the course of acquaintance, but acquaintance itself would be characterized purely in terms of the causal relation between the object, information processing in the brain, and what you do with it in your thinking. But what Russell wants is that acquaintance should be a connection of consciousness. Your awareness of the object should be what's constituting the relation of consciousness, the relation of acquaintance. Acquaintance is not something where consciousness just happens to be around. The connect between you and the object is constituted by your consciousness of the object. You see what I mean? this connect between you and the object is consciousness of the thing, it's seeing the thing. That's what matters for reference in this picture. And this is a quote from G. Moore, which is really extending the notion of acquaintance, saying, I am as directly aware of the existence of material things in space as of my own sensations. This is part of Moore's famous refutation of idealism, and this is the key point in Moore's refuting idealism, that the idealist says, I'm only acquainted with my own sensations, so how do I get out from beyond that to knowledge of physical objects? And the idealist famously says, well, you don't. There is no such, you have no conception of matter itself. You have only the conception of your sensations. But the key move in responding to the idealist is to say, but this relation of conscious acquaintance, I can stand into a table or a chair or another person. I can be as directly connected to them as I am to sensations. So if we're going to think of this relation as itself a relation of consciousness, we have to reckon with the Nagel remark that I was emphasizing last time. We are completely unequipped to talk about the subjective character of experience without relying on imagination, without taking up the point of view of the experiential subject. The only way you have of getting onto bat consciousness would be to imagine what it's like in there. The only way that we have in ordinary life of getting onto each other's conscious states is to imagine what's going on with the other person. No amount of describing the brain, no amount of objective description is going to give you that. But then, how are we to think of imagination? This is the key point about whether it's confined to what's in the head or not. You can make a contrast between what I'll call de re and de dicto imagining. Can you put your hand up if you've heard that contrast, de re and de dicto, before? Okay, 3, 4, okay, not a lot. But the idea is very simple, is very crude. De re means there's some ray, something, right, that this is of, something out there that this is about. Whereas de dicto is to say it's just about a representation. It's just about something you're saying. So I want to make a contrast between thinking about imagining as something that's essentially connected to an external object, or thinking about imagining that has to do only with what's going on inside the head. So if you think of imagining someone else's experiences in what I'll call de dicto terms, then Nagel's point would be that since all you can imagine is what's inside someone's head, then the only notion of consciousness you can make sense of relates to what's internal to someone's head. So you can't actually make any sense of this concept of a relation of consciousness between the other person and the thing out there. You see how that would follow? That if what you're doing in an imaginative exercise entirely concerns the self here, then the imaginative exercise couldn't be involving something like a relation of consciousness. That's just a contradiction. Yeah? Whereas, if we say there's such a thing as de re imagining, where what you do is you have knowledge of the thing out there in the environment, and then you imagine of that thing, of that ray. Ray meaning real or something like that, of that bit of reality. Imagine of that bit of reality that the other person is imagining it. Then that brings in the connection between the environment and the other person. You see what I mean? So in de re imagining, your imagining of understanding of someone else's sensory experience constitutively depends on your knowledge of the environment. You've just got to know what's there in the other person's environment to be able to do this kind of imagining. Whereas on de dicto imagining, that you might know about the environment, but that just gives you a way of guessing at what's likely to be going on inside their head. Yeah, you could really throw away the knowledge of the environment in the end, so long as you get it right about what's going on in there. Let me try and fill out the idea of de reimagining. Suppose you're a set designer. Suppose you're a set designer for a fairly low budget theatrical performance. So it's your job to design and build the set, right? You're doing the whole thing yourself, right? Follow me very closely here. So you're building the set, and let's suppose that the auditorium's under repair, so you can't actually get into any of the chairs there, okay? Then you're designing the set. What you have to do is imagine how this is going to look to someone sitting in the orchestra pit, sitting in the balcony, sitting in one of the boxes, right? You've got to imagine, is their view of the actors going to be obstructed by the set? Is it going to be cluttered? Is it going to seem gaudy? Is it going to seem a bit too fancy? Is it going to seem plain and simple? How's this going to be from different perspectives in the auditorium? Right? That's your task. So that's what I'm calling de reimagining. Because what you're doing is you're imagining of this thing, how it's going to be from various perspectives in the theatre. Yeah? That involves the set. It wouldn't make sense to subtract the set and then ask, well, what's going on inside the mind? You first of all identify the structure, and then you imagine lots of different perspectives on it. What you're doing is you're imagining these people's relation of acquaintance to the set from all these different perspectives. Yeah? You're trying to imagine how the thing will look from different positions in the theatre. And what it suggests is that kind of de re use of the imagination, where it involves a connection between the environment and the other person. That's the basic way we use imagination. I think in the literature on Nagel, in the thousands of pages that have been written on Nagel, it's always taken to be round the other way, that imagining what's internal to the head is the basic thing, and that's the thing you can't do with the bat. But really, if you thought of, if you were a set designer and you thought of it in those terms, if you thought, I've got to imagine what's going on, hidden from everyone else, internal to the head of the people sitting in the wings or the people sitting in the main body of the auditorium, then your task would be likely to strike you as altogether impossible. Right? I mean, maybe their spectrums are inversions of yours. Maybe they perceive spatial relations the way you perceive the relations between the tones in an organ. You know, but I mean, who knows what's going on? If you're just a humble set designer, you're going to think, this is totally beyond me. I have no idea, right? But in fact, the thing is not totally beyond you. The thing is a completely everyday matter. I mean, anyone who's thinking about how does, if I'm at the start of the lecture thinking, how does the screen look? Is it going to be visible to the people at the back? That's something, you do that kind of thing every day. And it's not at all a difficult thing. It is a question about other minds, but the bulk of the work is being done by your knowledge of your environment. Yeah, is the environment coming first, and then you're getting behind the head of someone and imagining their take on that bit of the environment. So if you were really trying to do it in terms internal to the head, you'd be in this problem of an inverted spectrum and so on. But actually, how many of you have come across the bat before this class? Some, about a third? Okay. I mean, the bat's a very famous example. It seems to me that the way the bat is usually interpreted, it's you don't know what's going on behind the furry brow, right? You can't get in there. You just there's no room in there for you to get your imagination, something like that. It seems so impossible. But the way I'm setting it up here, it seems to be completely arguable that what you really can't find out about in the case of the bat is what its environment is. That's what's so weird about bats. You know, they skitter about, they wheel about. You can't quite make out what they're responding to. You know, if a bat looks at a flower, is it seeing a flower the same way you do? If a bat comes into the room, is it getting onto the tables and chairs? Bats don't really know about tables and chairs. You see what I mean? Or maybe tiny bugs too small for you or me to see are the most important thing in the world for the bat. You can't do that real-time, day-ray imaginative exercise with a bat, not because you can't get inside its head, but because you don't know what its environment is. You can't in real time figure out what it's picking up on. Yeah? So that day-ray imaginative exercise is easy with other people because we all get the tables and chairs. You know, the tables and chairs are kind of important when you're coming in and going to sit down in a room. But, and we all know that about each other. So we each know of the other, what bit of the environment they are getting onto. So it's relatively easy then to imagine what your take on the room is. That's not a deep problem. That doesn't get you into these questions about inverted spectra or anything like that. Because you've just got the room. The room itself is the common factor between us all in our ordinary experience. And once you know that, you know enough to be able to have an imaginative understanding of someone else's mind, to be able to understand what their relations of acquaintance are to their surroundings. I think one advantage of this is joint attention really seems to be important in your knowledge of someone else's mind. I mean, it's a really basic thing with young children, getting to the stage about 1 year old when the caregiver will take an object. This came up when we were talking about Wittgenstein, actually. I seem to remember someone sitting over here raised joint attention. There will be there's a phase about 1 year old where the caregiver and the child can both focus onto the same object, and the child will look to the caregiver, look at the object. Is this scary? Is it interesting? What do you think of it? And that's really important to ordinary, just to ordinary social life, to getting on with each other, to understanding other minds. I mean, if you think about how you get to know someone else, the basic way we do that is you engage in joint attention activities. You both attend to the same thing, and you kind of reference about what you're making of it. You go to a movie, you go to a theatre show, you go to an exhibition. You stare at the same things, right? And then you kind of look at each other and think, what do you make of that? So we really take joint attention behaviours to be the entry point to our knowledge of one another's minds. But if you thought about imagination as entirely internal to the head, that would really be baffling. You know, because if it's internal to the head, then what you would have to do is make this vault into someone's inner world inside the head. And why would staring at the same objects be so important to helping you to do that? If you think of imagination as basically a day-array exercise, though, then that's easy. I mean, here's a recent article by a couple of developmental psychologists explaining this picture. They said, there's an early stage at which infants do not yet know much about perspectives, modes of presentation, in our sense. So there is early stage at which infants don't know anything about senses or modes of presentation, perspectives, but they can, in fact, share perspectives in joint attention or joint engagement, as evidenced by such actions as gaze following, alternating gaze between object and co-attender, holding up and showing or pointing to objects and events. So that's level 1 joint attention, where you see what the other person is engaged with. You know that they're engaged with that object, but you don't necessarily have any understanding of what their mode of presentation of that object is. So this is Piaget's 3 mountains task. So this is a square of hardboard about 1 meter by 1 meter, and on it there are 3 mountains. I mean, they're biggish, actual physical mountains mounted in the hardboard. So you get the child on one side, an adult on the other side, and there are 4 paintings that show, first of all, the view from here, then another painting showing the view from there, another painting showing the view from here, and can you guess what the last one shows? The view from here, right? So there are these 4 paintings showing the view of the scene that you're getting from different perspectives. And there's an early stage at which the child can engage in joint attention behaviors for particular mountains with the adult on the other side just fine. Yeah? Yeah.
It's like a shack example.
A what? It is a shack example. That's great. Yeah, it is a shack example. So at that early stage, at what Muller and Meltzer call level 1, then the child can do joint attention, right? It can get which mountain the other person is looking at. They can engage in joint attention behaviors. So there's a sense in which they get reference, right? There's a sense in which they know what the other person is talking about, what the other person is thinking about. But if you show them the 4 paintings and say, which one shows what the person on the other side is getting, they always point to the painting that shows their take. They always point to the painting that shows the perspective they've got. They don't have the idea of another perspective. They can't do that imaginative exercise, that is, imagining of this scene, what it's like from over there. You see what I mean? And it would be definitive of them getting how the scene is presented from over there, that they point to the right painting. That would show that they're able to do that thing the set designer does of take the scene and flip yourself into the perspective of the other and imaginatively get the scene from that other side. So what's going on in that move in that stage in development is that you're moving from joint attention to a level of de re imaginative understanding of one another. So I say that de re imaginative understanding of one another, that's the foundation of all our understanding of sense and reference. That's your knowledge of someone else's perceptions of objects, the foundation of your understanding of other people's singular reference. And Phrygian sense, you first of all get in the context of that de re imaginative project. Is that crystal clear? I can go on about this just a little bit more if it would help. But time's pressing on, and if that's crystal clear, then I'll skip a little bit and move on to look at Wittgenstein. Yes?
Is this move from joint attention to de re something biological?
Biological? Well, it will presumably be biologically grounded. I mean, you couldn't do it unless you had a brain, and unless you had a brain of the right kind. Yeah, but it's not explained in biological terms. Yeah, I'm actually just relying. That actually goes straight to this imaginative versus objective understanding. Yeah, biology is describing this biologically would be going straight to a biological level of understanding, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying, let's consider what the imaginative exercise is. Yeah, if there is maybe the biology will illuminate it, but that comes later. Just an understanding what this imaginative exercise is. We don't have to do any biology. Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure how using awareness or this kind of exercise will be susceptible to the same other things, or like the idea with looking at in your head or explaining their use or whatever. So if the point is just like, well, understanding use is something that comes about because you can have another perspective, it seems like that's just one way of explaining use is finite.
Very good. Okay. Oh, well, that's exactly the main point of my next thing. So you moved me on briskly. Okay. So just to sum this up, the imaginative exercise is not quite right to describe it the way Moore does as a two-place relation. You can think that what you're doing is you're imagining this scene from the point of view of a perceiver. Yeah? The same perceiver could move around and occupy any point of view. But if I'm trying to imagine how the room looks to you right now, I'm imagining the external scene from your point of view. Okay? There's a three-place thing here. Okay, but let's get on to Wittgenstein. I was going to say something brief that I think is very obvious at this stage about Dretschke and Fodor. That Dretschke and Fodor are, you can see it from this diagnosis that when Dretschke's talking about biological function, or when Fodor's talking about causal asymmetry, what they're trying to do is describe normativity at the level of objective explanation. But what I'm just been suggesting is that we get normativity at the right and wrong at the level of imaginative understanding. That's okay? I mean, you may agree or not, but that's the idea. Yeah, okay. So with Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein's idea seems to be something like the notion of a custom or practice is what explains how there can be right or wrong in the use of a word. And then we had this problem: how can the existence of a custom or practice explain the existence of standards of right or wrong? Remember this example with the compasses. So you got a line, and you got someone holding a pair of compasses, and they move along the line with very great care, going, doing that. And you think, I just have no idea what this guy is doing. He's holding a pair of compasses, carries one of its points along the line that's the rule, and the other one draws the line that follows the rule. And this one, you just can't see what to do next. While he moves along the ruling line, he alters the opening of the compasses, apparently with great precision, looking at the rule the whole time, as if it determined what he did. So looking at the bottom line here with great intensity. And watching him, we see no kind of regularity in the opening and shutting of the compasses. We cannot learn his way of following the line from it. And here you really would say the original seems to him to intimate which way he is to go, but it's not a rule. He seems to be getting his lesson as to which way to go from this bottom line, but there's no rule there because we can't pick it up. So if you contrast this with the ordinary situation, if you start using a word, you know, if there's some new word that you're using, and I just kind of get it. Or another example to think about is musicians improvising. If you're playing an instrument and you're playing off someone else, you just need to be able to go on kind of in sync with them. You don't need to be going deep inside their head. You don't need to be imagining, imagine I was holding a guitar right now. What would I be doing next? You don't need to do that. It's a kind of external keeping in touch with the beat as they're generating it, something like that. And with the compasses, if someone's doing something with the compasses that you can pick up on, you don't need to go deep inside their head. The kind of empathy that's missing in the case of the guy with the compasses is one that it just has something to do with being in sync with the other person. It's a purely external thing. You can talk the same way they do. You can carry on in the same way they carry on. And very often, if we talk about someone being empathetic, that's really what we mean. That's the important thing in lots of ordinary social life. You can pick up how someone else is talking and talk in that way yourself. Yeah? And that seems to be what Wittgenstein is highlighting. So this is the case that you were talking about, where you get the teacher going, this is water, that's water, and over there is water, and the pupil going, this is water, that's water, and over there is water. And all that matters is that the pupil pick up the beat from the teacher, right? Be able to go on in the same way as the teacher. So I think that is something you recognize as a notion of empathy, that the pupil is in touch with what the teacher is doing. And your point was the image of water. Well, class, what happens to the image of water? It goes away. It drops out. It does no work. Right? That was. See, look, there you are. It's gone away. Right? What more proof do you need? And that was Wittgenstein's point, right? This image of water is just a fifth wheel that doesn't do anything. It doesn't set a standard of right or wrong for your use of the term. But then the puzzle was, if this is all we've got, if you've got the teacher and the pupil going on in sync, and more generally in a kind of more egalitarian way, with just you and I going on in sync, and that's all there is to our use of language, well, the puzzle is where do right and wrong come in? Yeah? So we've got a kind of empathy here, going on in the same way, keeping to the same beat in your use of the word, but that's not bringing in right and wrong. And what I want to suggest is, what would bring in right and wrong is a kind of de re imaginative understanding that I was talking about. So what you need is not to get inside the other person's head and say, oh, in there is an image of water. What you need is to get onto something in the other person's environment, namely the water. You need to be able to say, that's what they're responding to, and you need to be able to imaginatively understand their take on that stuff. That's what gives you a full-blooded understanding. So in a way, that is reinstating the bit in the middle, but it reinstates it by bringing in the water itself and the other person's take on it. And the water itself is what you're referring to. And that's what determines the standards of right and wrong. So that's where Wittgenstein went wrong. He didn't bring in this richer level of imaginative understanding, of imagining de re. He left it at the level of that kind of keeping in sync empathy. Yep. That's what Wittgenstein missed out. Yes. That's not completely precise, but it's good enough. That's roughly what I mean. Yeah. Anything else in that? Is that clear as a bell and completely persuasive? Yeah. Cottoning on, yes, right. That's right. Uh-huh. You're not too good at jokes yourself, yes. Right. Yeah. That's very good, yeah. There's no place. There's no place for that in my picture. You're right. I don't know that there is a place for that in Wittgenstein's picture. I mean, in the case of the compasses, he puts it in terms of we cannot learn his way of following the line from it. Yeah, and cottoning on usually seems to mean these are really interesting cases where you can see what someone else is doing, but think I can't do it myself. I don't think it makes. Does it make any sense in the basic cases of where, you know, if you watch someone else taking the successor of a number, or you watch someone else using the word red, and you said, yes, I can never tell when things are red myself, but I can see that you're doing it really great. I mean, I can see that there's a kind of, it's not a contradiction in that, but it's really a strange idea. Yeah. 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 It's a great example, and it's at a different place in the map from anything I had considered. Yeah. I had just considered the place where the other person goes on a bit and then you can do it yourself. And then I was saying you need to vault beyond that into an a de re imagining of what they think of what they're doing. Yeah. But you're describing something even more primitive, where you can see what the other person is doing but not do it yourself. Is that right? Yeah. And okay, that really is intriguing, and I just agree that there is that possibility, and it's very interesting to think it through for basic cases. 1, 2. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true, and that's something to bear in mind with this compasses example, that on the face of it, you would say, but surely he could be following a rule. It's just that he's onto something that we don't know about. Yeah, that would be like your colorblind example. Yeah, and Wittgenstein's point there is, it seems to be something about this anti-realism about whether someone is following a rule or not. That it only makes sense to talk about following a rule insofar as the rest of us can actually get onto what they're doing. I think the colorblind example also brings out something that's the funny example. I'm not funny myself. What you've got there is the word funny, and you use the word funny in just the same way they do. Yeah. So you're just as good at using the word funny as the comedian. Yeah. What you can't do is generate comedy, but yeah, that really is a case. That might be like the you can't quite see what the comedian is doing when they come up with all these gags. You see what I mean? And there you might say there really isn't a rule. It's a great case. I mean, I don't want to try and solve it with a 10-word remark. Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to make a related point about like maybe in the case of the comedian, what we could say is that we know what it would take. So we have some sense that we know what it would take to be funny in the way that they are. Although then there's a worry about like, you could say, well, if I really knew what it took, then I could do it myself.
If
But
you
it seems to be like this maybe like halfway point, like where we think we have a sense
Yeah.
of the rule, but we can't like perform or like take up the rule.
Yeah, I mean, you know when success has been achieved. It's just that you don't know how to achieve success. You recognize it when it's there. Just like being able to tell, I mean, if you just think of being able to win a race, right? Being able to tell when someone's won the race, that we can all do. Being able to win the race, right? That's something else. Yeah, being real good at telling when someone's going over the line first. That's not going to help you a bit in actually running faster. Yeah, these are just two quite different things. Being coach and... Yes, right, something like that. Yeah, that would be the criticism of coaches. You can't do it yourself. Okay, so that resolves what was missing in Wittgenstein, right? What was missing was that de re imaginative understanding. He was right to be thinking it's something to do with images, yeah. But it's not an image internal to the head. It's the external relation to the water. That acquaintance with the water is what's missing from Wittgenstein's later picture. Just one last quick remark about Davidson. Remember Davidson made this striking remark about reference dropping out, playing no essential role in explaining the relation between language and reality. Well, and he had this example of Raleigh refers to the place 1 mile west of Raleigh, Isaac refers to the place 1 mile west of Isaac. You remember how that went, working through that. And from the present perspective, then you can see that these are actually different hypotheses to the regular ones, because you'd be doing a different de re imaginative exercise if you had this interpretation of the names than if you had the other interpretation of the names. You get this interpretation of the name, you're looking at a place and imagining of it what the speaker's take on it is. But if you do the standard one, you're just looking at a person and imagining of it what the speaker's take on it is. So these are different de re imaginative exercises. That's where Davidson went wrong. But if you go on into giving an explicit semantics for language, Davidson's point looks much better, because if you guys have ever glanced at what people do in explicit semantic treatments of more complex bits of language, it gets very complicated very quickly. So far through this whole class, we really deal with the very simplest sentences. We don't even really get as far as quantifiers, except we glance a bit at them doing descriptions. But suppose you just take a sentence like, "It's always raining in Manchester." How are you going to explain what that means? A natural reaction, a natural interpretation would be something like, "At any moment M," right? At M it's raining in Manchester. Yeah? So you could treat time there as a collection of points, a collection of moments, a collection of instants. Or you could say, well, actually, it doesn't make any sense to talk about raining at an instant. If something, if it rained for an instant, that wouldn't be rain, right? I mean, that might be some weird barometrical freak where you had water in the air for just a moment, but that's not rain, whatever that is, right? It can only make sense to talk about raining for a period. So maybe what you've got here is a quantifier over periods, right? So for every period P, there's rain in Manchester at P. And then you can see that you're in the position to settle down for quite a complicated dispute as to how exactly you're going to explain the time operators here. But really, at the end of the day, it would be a natural reaction to say, this is no psychological reality. I mean, ordinary people don't think in terms of domains of instants or domains of periods or some more complicated construction. If you get the same truth conditions out, it just doesn't matter. And in general, when you're giving an explicit semantics for complex bits of language, you may have to use lots of technical notions that just don't have any very evident psychological reality. So and these technical notions, reference is just the very simplest technical notion, and Davidson's point does not sound at all right for reference. But the imaginative exercise that is the psychological reality here may not have the kind of structure that would mean that you can really differentiate between different technical approaches at the level of a person's psychology, that a person's psychology makes one of these readings rather than another correct. It may just be indeterminate. Do you want to comment on that, Melissa? Yes, right. Yeah, instances of periods, and what I'm suggesting is it doesn't really matter what you say. Yeah. Right.
And then there's a formal project about whether you could capture everything, for example, by quantifying over famous regions. And that's just kind of, that's a formal exercise in like topological semantics, but I think people just like to think. So yeah, I think it's true. It's hard to show that there's any psychological realities with those people are like still fighting over it.
Yeah, people still fight over it, but at the end of the day, it may even be provable that the two approaches are equivalent. Yeah. And anything you can do in terms of points, you can do in terms of periods. Anything you can do in periods, you can do in terms of points. I mean, that just immediately sounds kind of plausible, that mathematically you'll be able to do that. And then you say, but then Davidson's right for that kind of construction. Okay, we started a bit late, so we've gone on a bit. Any final questions? Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, we'll go line by line through the Russell on Friday. Okay, great.